case, the order of our witnesses, they are sequenced in a specific way that fits the evidence that we intend to put on and the presentation we intend to make during our case in chief. In addition, this trial has been on calendar for all parties and the court for upwards of 6 months now. Our witnesses have arranged their summer schedules, both professional and personal travel, around being here during the week when we'll be presenting our case. If this issue had been raised months or even weeks ago, it's something that we would have considered. We're not sort of just objecting for the sake of objecting, but to raise it. I believe the first I heard of this was yesterday, and it's not something that we're able to accommodate in the middle of a week of trial that we've spent months preparing for in a very deliberate and thoughtful way.
So we actually raised it Monday, at the end of the trial day Monday, and it's not uncommon at all for parties to work cooperatively in a situation like this, accommodate the schedules of the lawyers and the witnesses, and so we don't think it's too much to ask. And if they're going to put on a rebuttal case, then there would likely need to be sometime Friday for defendants to put some witnesses on anyway. But we're concerned that we'll get too close and Dr. Brunel will be here, won't be able to testify, and that will cause an issue. So
I'd talk about it maybe.
We can talk about it at our next, well, we can come back, I guess, tomorrow morning and give you some guidance. But and I think that every time that I've encountered a situation like this, it would need to be by consent of the parties. And it sounds like with the time constraints that the plaintiffs have, that they have difficulty finding a time they can commit to allow your witness to testify out of order. But that's, I'd urge you to keep talking.
we certainly will, Your Honor, but I mean, the solution would be, I realize they have their witness to order, but the solution would be is if they went ahead and called the two Dr. Madden and Pagan who have been here, that would resolve the issue. And so it's disappointing, to say the least, that they will not consider doing that.
Right. I think we fully expect to have the trial of this matter end next Friday, and it creates a whole host of logistical issues to extend beyond that. So that's not a viable option. All right. But we'll just leave it at that, and if we can add anything further to it, we will next time.
Can I just ask one thing, if you don't mind? And I know you've got two other experts that you want to have testify. Roughly, how long do you think their testimony will take?
We have actually 3 additional experts who will testify, and each of them is shorter than Dr. Kent. I would say each of their direct testimony will be in the range of 2 to 3 hours.
Okay. Roughly, I guess we'll cross maybe. So we're looking potentially at 5 hours per witness then, right? Give or take?
It depends on cross-examination. I'll also say if you have a voter plaintiff who's here today, and if it's at all possible to get his testimony in today, he's from High Point and has an immediate family member in the hospital he'd like to get out today. So we're hoping to be able to do that today.
All right. Okay.
We're certainly planning to, the cross-examinations of the remaining experts shouldn't be nearly as long. Obviously, Dr. Chin has been a unique situation, and of course the plaintiff spent 1 full day with him on direct. So, and let me, for the court order's sake, I haven't been here yet today. This is Phil Strack with Oaktree Deacons. But we do intend to try to manage our crosses to try to help resolve this issue.
I'd just say that if there is time on Friday and it works out schedule-wise, and if your witness is here prepared to testify, then obviously, then it may happen. But it's hard to hard to put limitations on things when we still have at least three experts to go on the plaintiff's case. So, yeah. All right, well, let's then move on. We have a short afternoon this afternoon, so let's continue with cross-examination from Mr. Farley.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Dr. Chen, in your witness notebook, could you turn to, I think it's tab 6, and I'd like you to look at Plaintiff's Exhibit 14.
Yes.
And that's figure 4 from your opening report, is it not?
Yes.
Okay, you've explained this quite well, Dr. Chen, so I can skip some questions. But I do have a few questions about this. Your algorithm, and if I don't use the right precise term, then correct me, but your algorithm used your compactness measure to redraw all 120 House districts. Is that correct?
I'm not redrawing any districts at all. The computer simulation algorithm is producing 120 districts. And of course, you've heard me discuss how some of them are actually frozen, but I think you got the right idea.
Okay. And that's the same answer for all 50 Senate districts.
Well, the computer simulation program is certainly producing Senate plans, and those Senate plans do have 50 districts.
Okay, so your algorithm redrew all 120 House districts and all 50 Senate districts.
No, not at all. I mean, I think you've heard me talk at quite a bit of length yesterday about how there are, of course, some of these districts that are essentially frozen and so on. But with those caveats, I think you're understanding the right idea, which is that Senate plans do have 50 districts.
So except for the districts that you froze, your algorithm redrew all 120 House districts.
Again, I'm not redrawing. The computer program is not redrawing any districts at all. It's producing plans that have, it's not taking existing plans or existing districts and making alterations to them. The algorithm is starting anew every time, and it's producing complete plans.
So the word I should use is drawing, not redrawing.
Well, I use the word simulate, but
Okay.
I understand what you mean by drawing as well.
Okay. Now, did the legislature follow a compactness measure in 2011?
I'm not sure I have the proper basis to give you a precise answer on that. I mean, I can tell you what I did, which is I followed compactness as a traditional districting principle in the algorithm.
But you don't know if the legislature had a compactness measure in 2011.
Like I said, I just don't have the basis to tell you one way or another. I can just tell you that compactness is a traditional districting principle, and I've told you about how I have implemented it in the algorithm.
So when I use the word change districts, do you understand I mean only the districts that were changed for 2017 in the enacted plan?
Sure, I'll set that.
Okay. Did you segregate out only the change districts and compare their average compactness score to the average scores for your simulated plans?
If I could ask you to repeat that question.
I think we went over this in your deposition, so I hope that might help you remember. But did you segregate out only the districts that were changed in 2017 when we know that the legislature had a compactness criteria, and compare the average compactness scores of those districts to the average score of your simulated plans?
Okay, now I understand your question. And the answer to your question is yes, I have now done that after producing the simulated plans initially. And I've done those comparisons.
You haven't testified about that.
No, it wasn't in my report.
Okay. So in your report, did you explain how the average compactness scores for the 2017 plans, or for the 2011 plans, impacted the average score of the 2017 plan?
That question doesn't make sense to me. How does the compactness scores impact the compactness scores? It doesn't really make sense as a question to me.
Okay, I don't really understand why it doesn't make sense to you, Dr. Chen, but I'll try to do the question better. You have an average compactness score for the entire 2017 plan. you calculated that, correct?
You're asking about the enacted House plan or the
Yes.
enacted Senate? All right, so I'll take the enacted House plan. That's
Okay.
that's what we're calling the 2017 House plan.
Okay, and your report does not discuss the average compactness score for the 2011 districts that were not changed in 2017.
I didn't analyze the 2011 enacted plan, except insofar as obviously there are some districts that were drawn in 2011 and not changed in 2017. Those districts I did analyze because I analyzed the compactness of the 2017 House plan or the current enacted House plan.
Right, but, so you didn't compare only the changed districts in 2017 and the average compactness scores of the changed districts versus the average score of your simulated plans.
I did the comparisons for all the districts, and insofar as that involves the 2017 districts, I did do those comparisons.
Okay, Dr. Chen, I'm going to try to ask this question again. You did not take the changed districts in your report and calculate an average compactness score only for the changed districts.
So I've told you that I've calculated those things for all of the districts. And a couple moments ago, you asked me about just the 2017 redrawn districts, and I told you that I have now done those calculations.
Right, and that wasn't disclosed in your expert report.
I didn't write that in my expert report.
Okay, so I'm not going to ask you about that because you didn't disclose it in your expert report. So my question is, in your expert report, did you segregate out the average compactness score for the changed districts, only the changed districts in the 2017 plan?
So like I said, I didn't do that calculation in the original report.
Okay.
I've since done it.
So in your original report, you did not segregate out and calculate an average compactness score for the 2017 districts that did not change from 2011.
Same answer there.
Okay, so in your report, you did not analyze how the compactness scores for the 2011 districts that were carried over into 2017 may have impacted the overall compactness score for the 2017 plan.
Of course I did that. Those were inherently part of my calculations. If they were in the 2017 House plan, I included them in my compactness calculations because I'm calculating the compactness of the entire enacted House plan, all of the districts, all 120 and all 100 and all 50 districts.
Okay. I'm just going to move on to another question and let the record stand the way it is, Dr. Chen. Now, you did not do any simulated maps where you instructed your algorithm to match but not exceed the enacted plan's average REOC or Polsby-Popper scores.
If I could ask you to repeat that, please.
You did not run any simulations where you instructed your algorithm to only match but not exceed the average compactness scores in the 2017 plans.
No, I didn't do that. That wouldn't really make sense.
Okay.
No jurisdiction that I know of would ever say we just want a REOC score of no higher than 0.25 or something like that, but don't get any higher than that because we don't want districts to be too compact. So no, of course I didn't do that.
Of course you didn't. Okay. So you did not determine if the enacted plan's pro-Republican advantage was caused by the General Assembly's choice on the average REOC and Polsby-Popper scores.
I'm going to ask you to repeat that question.
You did not determine if the enacted plan's pro-Republican bias that you've talked about was caused by the General Assembly's choices on the average REOC and Polsby-Popper scores.
So I've not specifically studied that with respect to North Carolina's legislative districting plans, but that is something I've actually studied in my broader academic work, so I can tell you a little bit about that.
Well, you can have your attorney ask you that question. I just wanted to know if you did that for North Carolina.
Okay, well, I was just trying to, all right.
Okay, now let's turn to Exhibit 15, which is the plaintiff's Exhibit 15, which is under the same tab right after 14. And again, you've explained this, Dr. Chen, so I'm not going to waste everyone's time by asking you to do that again. But you applied your algorithm as it related to municipalities to every district in the 2017 plans.
Well, the algorithm worked the same way in every county grouping. So it was the same algorithm that was drawing all of these different simulated districts.
And did the General Assembly have a criteria in 2011 on municipalities?
Same answer as when you asked a similar question before. I don't have the basis for that except to say that following municipal boundaries is a traditional districting criteria. It certainly was a traditional districting criteria in 2011, just as it was in 2017. And so I built that into the algorithm.
But you could have examined whether or not the General Assembly adopted a criteria on split municipalities in 2011, and you did not do that.
Like I said, I just don't know I don't have a factual basis for that beyond what I've already told you about split municipalities or preserving municipalities to be a traditional districting criteria at all times.
Okay. And so you didn't identify the number of divided municipalities only in the changed districts and compare that number to your simulated equivalents.
No, I mean, I didn't do that. My job here was to analyze the traditional districting criteria for the entire plan, including the districts that were drawn in 2017 as well as 2011. And the reason I'm doing that is because my goal here, or the task put to me, was to determine the extent to which the current enacted House districts and the current enacted Senate plan subordinated traditional districting criteria.
Okay, now, do you know whether or not the General Assembly had the legal authority to change the districts that weren't changed in 2017?
I mean, I'm obviously not going to be able to give you a legal answer to that question.
Okay. And you did not study how many municipalities were divided by prior plans enacted by the General Assembly?
I didn't specifically study that in the course of my report. Obviously, you just had me read this morning some representation about what some of those numbers might have been.
But your report didn't examine how many municipalities had been divided in prior plans.
I was studying in my report the 2017, the current House plan and the current Senate plan. So I was not studying previous plans.
And so you don't know, Dr. Chen, how North Carolina has traditionally respected or not respected municipal lines in the drawing of districts.
I have testified about my understanding of traditional districting criteria, including the following of municipal boundaries and VTD boundaries. So I think I've told the court here the last 2 days about my expert, to the extent that I have expertise about traditional districting criteria, including those.
Right, but that didn't answer my question. My question is, you didn't determine how North Carolina has traditionally followed or respected or not followed or not respected city lines in drawing districts.
And like I've been saying, to the extent that I've talked about my knowledge of traditional districting criteria, I think I have.
Do you know what North Carolina has done in prior plans as far as dividing cities?
Same answer as before. I've been testifying about my knowledge of traditional districting criteria as a redistricting expert.
So you can't say how many cities were divided in prior plans adopted in North Carolina, say back in 2003 or 2011?
Of course, that was not part of my expert report. That wasn't relevant to what I was studying in my report.
And you didn't run any simulations instructing that your simulated maps divide the same number of cities as the number of cities divided by the enacted plans?
You're talking about the current enacted plan?
Yes.
It was 2011. So if I could ask you to repeat your question.
Sure.
Then.
You did not instruct your algorithm to do simulated maps that divided the same number of cities that were divided by the 2017 plans.
No, that just would not really make any sense. I mean, let's hypothetically suppose that the number of split municipalities is, let's just say, 75. Would there ever be a jurisdiction that actually says, we want to split exactly 75, or maybe just one fewer, exactly 74 municipalities. And we don't want to split any fewer than that because we want to have at least 74 split municipalities, at least. And let's guarantee that there's at least that number. It just wouldn't really make sense. There's no jurisdiction in the country that ever prioritizes wanting to achieve at least a certain minimum level of split municipalities. That's just not how that works as a traditional district approach.
But in your Common Cause v. Rucho plan, you did simulations that divided 13 counties, even though you testified that it was not necessary to divide more than 12 counties.
That's correct. In that report, as I explained in that report, the purpose of doing that third set of simulations, which is what you're referring to, was to determine whether or not some kind of hypothetical effort by the General Assembly in the SB2 plan, that congressional plan, 2016, whether or not a hypothetical effort to actually want to split 13 counties, even though that doesn't really make sense as a traditional districting criteria, could possibly explain the extreme partisan bias of the SB2 congressional plan. And as I testified in that case, I found that it could not.
Okay.
I mean, same thing here. It just doesn't really make sense that any jurisdiction would actually want to split a certain level of municipalities at a minimum.
So you didn't run any simulations to attempt to determine if the Republican bias you've observed in the 2017 plans was the result of the General Assembly's decision on how many cities to divide?
Of course, I didn't specifically answer that kind of question, but same answer as before. It just doesn't make sense. I don't know of any jurisdiction that says we want to split at least 75 municipalities because having 75 split municipalities is a really good thing that we want to have at least 75 of. No jurisdiction really thinks that way or has that sort of implementation of the traditional districting criterion of following municipal boundaries.
Okay. Do you know how many municipalities there are in North Carolina, Dr. Chen?
I'm sure it's in one of the data files that I turned over, but I'm happy to take your representation for it.
I don't know. Honestly, I've got to guess, but it's not good enough to give you a representation right now, so I apologize. Let's turn to figure 16. This is your Plaintiff's Exhibit 16 is your chart about divided VTDs, comparing your simulated Set 1 plans to the 2017 House plan. Is that correct?
Yes, I see this.
And you reported there's 48 divided VTDs in the 2017 House plan.
Yes.
And your simulations divide between 6 and 18, is that correct?
That's what this figure shows.
Now, did the General Assembly have a criteria on divided VTDs in 2011?
Same answer as before. I didn't study that. I don't have a factual basis to give you an answer.
And you didn't compare only the divided VTDs in the districts that were changed in 2017 versus your corresponding simulated districts.
You're asking if I just went through and counted up the 2017 districts VTDs while ignoring the 2011 drawn districts VTDs. Did I get your question right?
Well, maybe you did, but let me rephrase it. We all know, we've heard there were a lot of districts that weren't changed in 2017. So my question is, did you ever just look at the districts that were changed in 2017, count up the number of VTDs in those districts, and compare that number only to your simulated equivalent districts?
And so I'm going to explain that is an exercise in some respects might not even make sense because there are certain county groupings in which, and I think in both the House and the Senate plans, in which the county grouping contains both a 2011 drawn district and a 2017 drawn district, and they might share the same border. And so in those borders, you were splitting a VTD, would you even count that as a 2011 split VTD or a 2017 split VTD? Now, here's the bigger picture, though. When we see the traditional districting principle of split VTDs or following precinct boundaries or following VTD boundaries.
You see the traditional district.
Okay, I'll just start that last sentence over again. When we see the traditional districting principle of following precinct boundaries or VTD boundaries, what we mean is the number of VTDs that are split across the entire state, across the entire jurisdiction, across all districts, not just some districts, but not others. And that fits well with the whole purpose of my study in my original expert report, which was to examine the extent to which the current enacted House plan and the current enacted Senate plan, including all of its districts, was subordinating traditional districting criteria, including the following of VTDs.
Okay, Dr. Chen, but let's me give you a hypothetical. Let's just assume that North Carolina law prohibits the General Assembly from changing districts mid-decade unless they've been declared illegal. So let's assume that there were some districts drawn in 2011 that the General Assembly could not change because of that law. Could they then apply a new criteria on not dividing VTDs to those districts that they could not change?
And of course, the question you've asked is a legal question that I'm not qualified to give you a legal answer to. But in general, my study was trying to study all of those districts, was trying to examine the extent to which the entire current enacted House plan, all of its districts, and all of the current enacted Senate plan districts was subordinating traditional districting criteria. So of course I studied all of the districts.
Okay. But you don't know how many VTDs were divided or not divided in the 2011 districts that were carried forward into 2017.
I didn't isolate those.
And you did not instruct your algorithm to match or exceed the 2017 plan's number of divided VTDs.
To match or exceed the number of...
Match or not exceed, excuse me.
Okay, to match or not exceed
Yes.
the number of, what was the end of your question?
Divided VTDs in the 2017 plan.
So I wasn't trying to just get to the level of number of VTD split and then stop there. As I've said a couple of times earlier today, that doesn't really make sense because there's no jurisdiction in the country that says we want to have a certain number of VTDs that are split. So no, I didn't do that.
Okay. So you don't know if the partisan bias you've observed in the 2017 plan is caused by the number of VTDs that were divided.
Of course I know that. And the reason I know that is because that was the very design of the study that I did, of the redistricting study that I did in my simulation algorithm. The whole point was to see what happens when you draw districts that are actually prioritizing traditional districting principles rather than partisan intent, and then to compare the enacted plan to that. The whole point of the study is to, the whole point of the simulation algorithm is to be able to draw conclusions about that sort of hypothetical baseline.
Okay, but Dr. Chen, I don't think you understood my question. You didn't run any simulations that instructed your algorithm to only divide the same number of VTDs divided in the 2017 plan.
I think I've answered that question. I'll answer it again.
If you'd answered it, then I'll accept that. And so you don't know if the partisan bias in the 2017 plans is caused by the legislature's decision to divide 48 VTDs.
All right. I mean, if what you're suggesting in your question is that simply the decision to split VTDs is what caused the partisan intent or that caused the partisan effect, I mean, of course, that's not really, that doesn't really make logical sense. Partisan intent is what causes the partisan effect of the districting plans. I mean, just merely splitting a VTD by itself in a vacuum abstractly is not going to somehow cause a particular partisan bias unless it's done in conjunction with partisanship as a predominant intent in the drawing of the plan. So it's partisan intent that actually causes the partisan bias. That partisan intent can be carried out by subordinating traditional districting criteria, like following municipal boundaries and following precinct boundaries.
Okay. Now, if you instructed your algorithm to divide the same number of cities as were divided by the 2017 plan, you would have ended up with an entirely different set of simulated maps.
I just want to make sure I understand your question. You're saying if I had made sure the simulated plans divided at least or exactly as many cities as the 2017 plan, did I get you right?
Match or be lower.
Match or lower?
Match or higher. Let's do that.
Okay, all right, I'll take that one. Match or higher. So let's think about that. A map drawing process that wants to make sure that we match or get higher than the 2017 enacted plan's number of split cities is the question you just asked me.
I'll withdraw the question.
I'll
withdraw the question, Dr. Chen.
Please withdraw the question.
Okay.
I want to make a better question. I just want you to answer that question. Would you have a different set of simulated plans if you instructed your algorithm to draw plans that matched the number of divided cities in the 2017 plan?
Okay. Match the number of split municipalities or split cities.
Yes.
As the 2017 plan.
Yeah.
Okay, I got you. So no, I mean, of course I didn't do that. And again, it just doesn't make sense. There is no jurisdiction that I know of that would say, we really want to have 58 split municipalities because we really like having 58 split municipalities. If we only had 57, we wouldn't feel good about our plan. Anything below 57, that would be really bad. We want to have 58. It's just not how that traditional districting principle works.
Did you answer my question?
Yeah,
My question was, if you did that, would you have a different set of simulated plans?
Right, and my answer to your question was, I didn't do that because it doesn't really make sense to think about that as the way the traditional districting principle works, so I didn't do it.
I know you didn't do it. Now I'm asking you, if you had done it, would you have had a different set of simulated plans?
I mean, of course, because I just told you I didn't do it, I'm obviously not able to give you a precise answer to the rest of your question.
You're an expert on simulated plans, and you cannot answer the question as to whether or not you'd get a different set of simulated maps if you'd instructed your algorithm to match the number of divided cities in the 2017 plans.
I'm just telling you, Mr. Farr, that I'm not going to come up here and testify about something that I didn't do.
Okay. And you didn't determine if the partisan bias of the 2017 plans was caused by the legislature's decision to divide 48 cities or, excuse me, it looks like 79 cities, or to divide 48 VTDs.
So same answer as before, except I'm not sure that I agree with the premise of your question that the legislature intentionally decided to split 79 VTDs or whatever the other number was. I concluded that the legislature simply subordinated traditional districting principles regarding municipalities and VTDs in the pursuit of a partisan intent.
Okay. But in your Covington report, you did run a simulated set where you instructed your algorithm to divide 13 counties, even though there was no reason for the legislature to divide 13 counties, because your simulated districts always could divide 12.
What's the objection?
Objection, I believe counsel said the Covington report. I don't think Dr. Chen was an expert.
I meant Common Cause v. Rucho.
You're not objecting? No, I'm sorry. I just wanted to make clear that.
So the objection is sustained. It's been rephrased. Dr. Chen, you can answer. Go ahead.
Sure. As I said before, what I did in that report was that I noticed that there was one more county that was split than was necessary. And it actually didn't really make sense as something that the legislature would do. Why would the General Assembly intentionally say, we really, really want a 13th split a 13th split county, and we don't think this would be a good plan unless we had a 13th split county. I mean, no jurisdiction thinks that way. But given that, I wanted to see whether the legislature's failure to minimize down to 12 county splits could possibly explain the extreme partisan bias of the SB2 plan, and I found that it could not. Now here it makes even less sense, because why would no jurisdiction ever says we want to have exactly 79 or 78 split VTDs and no fewer than that. No map drawing process goes into drawing a legislative districting plan with that as a goal, with wanting to achieve 79 split VTDs and no fewer than that. So it just doesn't even make sense to posit that as a legislative goal.
Okay. I don't have the exhibits in mind, and we can get to them later if we can't do it this way, but I recall yesterday you testified about your interpretation of the incumbency criteria.
Well, I talked about how I applied the incumbency criteria.
Right, and then didn't we pop up a map you made of Alamance County, which showed that under your understanding of the incumbency criteria, the two incumbents in Alamance County would have worse districts under your simulated maps than the districts they would have under your simulated maps if the incumbency criteria was not applied?
I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about, but if you want to bring up an exhibit and put it in front of me, I'm happy to help you out.
Two house districts. Okay, now, Plaintiff's Exhibit 55 is up on the screen. Is that from Simulation Set 1?
It is.
And can everyone orient themselves to understand that under your Set 1, the two incumbents have districts that are within the range that you've calculated for your simulated maps?
That's not something that I analyzed.
Well, can't we just look at it and see that?
Maybe you're seeing something that I'm not, but I didn't analyze incumbents here.
Okay, well, like we've got House District 64 and House District 63. Both of those districts they're within the range of your simulated maps, isn't that correct?
Okay, if you're referring now to HD 63 and HD 64, now that makes sense.
Okay.
Before you had been asking about incumbents, and there's nothing about incumbents on this figure.
Okay, well, we'll let the record stand as it is, as I thought you talked about incumbents yesterday for these districts. Could you pull up the other map you did which was set to for this county group? No. Mm-mm. Is that set to, what number is it? Okay, so now we've got Exhibit 76, which is your set to chart showing the range of your simulated maps for Alamance County. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, you talked, when I asked you questions about divided VTDs and whatever, you said that several times that what I was asking you made no sense whatsoever. You remember that?
I mean, if you want to bring up a specific portion of...
I think everyone can recall you saying that, Dr. Chen, so I won't take any longer. Now, is it fair to say, Dr. Chen, that under your set 2, where you're applying your incumbency protection criteria, that the range for your simulated maps gets worse for the 2 Republican districts than the range they were in under your set 1?
Well, maybe if you could do a split screen where we could see those 2 figures, I could
Okay,
give you
can we do that?
an accurate answer to your question. Okay, and if you want to ask your question again.
We don't have the right map up yet, Dr. Chen. There it is. Okay, so you look at your set 1 where you didn't comply your incumbency criteria, and you look at set 2 where you applied your incumbency criteria. Is it fair to say that the ranges for your simulated maps for the 2 Republican districts are better in set 1 than set 2?
No, not really.
It's
you
not?
Can actually, would you like me to explain my answer?
Yeah, I sure would.
Okay. So let's start with set 1, which is on the right side, which is Exhibit 55 here. You can see that there's a wider range for each of the 2 rows. What each row is showing is the entire range of simulated districts for the most Democratic district and the second most Democratic district. And if we could just please zoom out to both of those exhibits here. So there's a wider range on the right side with House simulation set 1. There's a narrower range in the exhibit on the left, which shows House simulation set 2. And so why is there a narrower range there? Well, because set 2 is applying the incumbency protection criterion that I discussed at length yesterday. So it's just a narrower range. You can see at the extreme ends of the distribution. Let's just focus for the moment on the top row, because I think that it's illustrative in the same way that the bottom row is as well. So let's just focus on the top row there. You look at the entire distribution of gray circles on the top row for the Exhibit 55 on the right, the most Democratic district within each of the simulated plans in this Alamance County grouping. And you can see that the far right range of that gray circle distribution goes all the way up to about 0.58. And the bottom range of that top row, the gray circles go all the way down to 0.48. So that's just a wider range. And now let's go to the Exhibit 76 on the left. You see a narrower range. Most of the simulations are at around 51 to about 54%. And there are a few outliers beyond that, but most of the simulated plans are in that narrower range. So it's just a different range. It's a different set of simulated plans. It's a different set of district boundaries there for that grouping.
All right, but, sorry, Dr. Shen, are you finished? Keep going if you're not done.
Okay, I was just going to conclude that we can't just look at this and characterize one as, say, better for the Republicans and the other as worse or something like that. It's clearly just a different distribution.
Looking at House District 63, you've got quite a few more Republican districts in set 1 under your simulated maps than you have under set 2. Is that right?
If you could just repeat that statement.
You've got more gray dots that look like they're Republican districts in set 1 where you don't apply incumbency for House District, is it 63 on the top? Then you have gray dots indicating Republican districts in set 2 where you applied an incumbency protection criteria.
Okay, sure. I mean, I think that's probably an accurate characterization.
Okay,
doesn't necessarily lead to the conclusion that, say, one is inherently very different than the other distribution. I'm just pointing out that they appear to be different distributions. I think if you just want to characterize it with the way that you just did, which is to say, if you're just counting up the number of districts that are below the threshold of 50%, it is safe to say that in set 1, there are more of those than we see in set 2.
So do you know of any state that applies an incumbency protection criteria that would put an incumbent in a district that's worse for them to win than their existing district? Is that a traditional principle, Dr. Chan?
Well, I would say in general that incumbency protection is not a traditional districting principle. So to the extent that that answers your question, that's my answer.
So do you know any state that applies an incumbency protection criteria that would put an incumbent in a district that's worse for him than the one that he ran in prior to redistricting?
I'm sorry, Mr. Farr, if I could ask you to repeat.
Yeah, I mean, are you aware of any state that has a criteria of putting incumbents in new districts that are worse for them than the one that they had run in previously? Are you aware of any state that does that?
You're asking me if any state has that enshrined in their constitution or statutes regarding redistricting?
Or in all of your knowledge that you have, do you know states that apply incumbency protection criteria to make sure that their incumbents are in worse districts than the ones that they've run in previously?
Okay, sure. I mean, I'm not aware of that.
Okay, thanks. All right, now, let's see if I can just do this next set of questions based upon your uniform swing exhibit, which is under the same tab. I think it's Plaintiff's Exhibit 10. So first of all, Dr. Chin, we spent a lot of time looking at this yesterday, but I just want to confirm that under your simulated plans, if you have a uniform swing up to 51.42%, none of your simulations result in a majority of Democratic seats.
None of the simulated plans in that row, the 51.42 row, produce 60 or more Democratic districts. That is a correct reading.
Okay, and we had some testimony about the relevance of the statewide two-party vote for legislative districts. And can I read a question you were asked yesterday and an answer that you gave your counsel, I think, on this issue from the transcript? This is on page 43, begins on line 6 and runs through line 24. And the question was, Dr. Chin, given that this case is about state house and state senate districts, why didn't you use past election results from actual prior state house and state senate races to measure the partisanship of your simulated state house districts or even the enacted plans districts? And the answer you gave, which begins on line 11, well, we know that statewide elections are a better basis for comparing the partisanship of districts using specific legislative elections. Using a particular outcome of legislative elections, we know that those kinds of legislative elections can deviate from the long-term partisan voting trends of the precincts.
I'm sorry, can't do you?
Can deviate from the long-term partisan voting trends of that precincts because of districts' specific anomalous or idiosyncratic things like the presence or absence of a quality challenger. In addition to that, we know that if a district was drawn to have a partisan skew, to have a particular partisan skew, that can result in the district having uncompetitive elections or a lack of quality challenger. And those factors too can affect or skew the legislative result. That is, we see under particular legislative district elections. Okay? Do you recall that testimony?
Sure. I would just point out that I think you, in my answer, you read the word precinct, and obviously I meant to say the word district. I'm sure I just said the wrong word.
And that's fine, Dr. Chen. I say 21 when I mean 27, so I'll accept that. So Dr. Chen, What's a better measure for who wins a legislative race? The actual results of the legislative race, or an index that you might compose from prior statewide elections?
Well, I think we have some good evidence for that. One piece of evidence we had is when Representative Lewis was asked in August 2017 at a hearing of the Joint Redistricting Committee what would be used to measure partisan data. And Representative Lewis laid out 10 statewide elections, recent past statewide elections in North Carolina from 2010 to 16 to measure the partisanship of the General Assembly's new 2017 drafted districts. So that's one piece of answer that we have from North Carolina. There's another really good source of data, and that's Dr. Hoffler's files. And so we talked at length yesterday about how Dr. Hoffler constructed 3 different measures of partisanship in evaluating the partisanship of the draft districts that he was drawn. And I'll spare you all the details again, except that I'll tell you that all 3 of them were relying on recent statewide elections. So he gave one partisan formula, the average R formula that we talked about quite a bit yesterday. And that was different from the set of elections that Representative Lewis had said in August 2017 that the redistricting committee was going to use, but it was a different set of recent statewide elections. Dr. Hoffler also used this average, in addition to the average FAR formula, also used another set of statewide elections in his off-year measure. He used another set of elections. I'm sorry. Dr. Hoffler used another set of statewide elections in his, quote, off-year partisan formula. Those were the 2010 and 2014 U.S. Senate elections. In another PPI measure, Dr. Hoffler also constructed a partisan measure using 10 statewide elections. So that's pretty instructive that what map drawers are doing when they're considering the partisanship of their districts that they're drawing is they are using statewide elections, not state legislative election results.
Okay, so those are elections that the General Assembly had available to them when they drew the maps in 2017. So they're trying to look at that to predict what's going to happen in an election, just like you did, right, Dr. Chen?
No, I was just using the same measures of partisanship as the General Assembly, or as Representative Lewis said that the redistricting committee was using.
And the purpose of that is to predict what will happen in an election.
No, the purpose of me doing that is simply to use the same election data that Representative Lewis said the General Assembly's redistricting committee was going to use to measure the partisanship of the districts. That's it.
So you weren't trying to predict the number of districts that would be won by Democrats?
I was just trying to measure the partisanship of districts exactly as Representative Lewis said that the redistricting committee was using to measure the partisanship of the districts, and that's it.
Okay, so if you're not trying to predict the number of elections that the Democrats will win, why in the world did you do a uniform swing analysis?
Sure. I mean, in this uniform swing analysis, what we're looking at here is looking at the gap between the enacted plan and the computer simulated plans under alternative electoral environments. So this is a bunch of different alternative electoral environments that we see on this uniform swing figure. It's not at all, and this is a really important distinction, so I'm glad you asked the question, it's not at all making a prediction that in 2018 it will be a Democratic tied year, or that in 2020 it will be a Republican tied year, or anything like that. It is just saying, here are a bunch of possible different hypothetical alternative electoral conditions. And we don't know if they will happen in 2018, and we don't know if they won't. But here is what would happen to the gap between the enacted plan and the computer simulated plans under these alternative electoral environments.
So that means then your figure U1 is completely irrelevant to whether or not the Democrats can win a majority of seats under the 2017 plans.
No, it's completely relevant. It speaks directly to the looking at the partisan gap between the enacted plan and the computer simulated plans under hypothetical alternative electoral environments. That's the whole point of uniform swing analysis.
Okay, now, Dr. Chen, I want to go back to my question that I started this line with, which maybe I didn't ask it the right way, so I'll try to do better this time. what's a better measure of who actually won the elections in 2018? The elections or your 2010 to 2016 composite?
Well, if you're just thinking about the 2018 elections and we're after the fact, and you just want to know who won, then obviously you just go to the State Board of Elections and you look up what the actual results were in those legislative elections. But of course, that is not what map drawers do. And so that's not what I did because I wanted to use the same data. The reason I wanted to use the same data as what Representative Lewis said the redistricting committee was considering is because I was trying to evaluate the partisan intent of the General Assembly's map drawer.
Okay.
To evaluate partisan intent, I had to use the same partisan data as what the General Assembly had.
Okay, so Dr. Chen, did you do any study on how competitive the elections were in 2018 in your report?
I didn't.
And did you do any study on how many challengers there were in the districts in 2018?
No.
So in 2018, you had no knowledge upon which you could say that the skewed districts resulted in poor candidates.
That, if you're, maybe you can tell me what you're reading from when you're asking me about my claim regarding that, and I'll be happy to explain.
Okay, your testimony was, we know that if a district was drawn to have a partisan skew, to have a particular partisan skew, that can result in a district having uncompetitive elections or a lack of a quality challenger. So you didn't study whether the elections were competitive in 2018.
Well, I wasn't studying it specific to 2018. That's something I wrote about in my original expert report, and that's something that I wrote about in general, drawing upon my knowledge of political science, which is that in many state legislative elections, especially skewed elections, that is, districts that are drawn to have a particular partisan skew in favor of one party or another and are very partisan extreme, often are more likely to be uncontested or to not have quality challengers. That's just a general finding from political science. I did not specifically measure the extent to which that occurred in 2018 specifically, but that's a general area of study in political science.
Right, so just the answer to my question, I hope, is a yes or no. You didn't study whether skewed districts resulted in a lack of a quality challenger in 2018.
And again, my answer is no with respect to 2018 in North Carolina, but yes to legislative elections generally.
Okay, and that would be the same answer in terms of whether a skewed election results in an uncompetitive election. You did not study whether the 2018 elections were uncompetitive.
Same answer as before. That's something that we generally know from political science literature.
Okay, Your Honor, I'd like to hand up an exhibit that for purposes of this hearing, I'd like to mark as Chen Impeachment 1. Who should we mark this? Yeah, Your Honor, we'll electronically mark this and I'll identify it so we know which exhibit we're talking about, but we don't have exhibit stickers on this right now. Is that okay?
I think it would make more sense to mark it as legislative defendant exhibit something.
Okay.
Whether you choose to admit it or not is another question. I'm not sure we need a lot of nomenclatures going on.
We need to mark it, Alicia. He just asked me to mark it. LDTX 282.
Yes.
And I'll represent to you, Dr. Chen, this is an official report from the North Carolina State Board of Elections, 11/04/204 official general election results for the U.S. Senate race in 2014. Now, was this one of the elections that was included in the 2010 to 2016 composite?
I'll be happy to look it up. I'm just going to have to open up my report.
Sure,
if you'd like me
please
to
do.
that. It is one of the election contests that Representative Lewis listed in August 2017.
Okay, and do you see under the, there's a heading that says ballot cast, and it says 42.35%, and then it says 2939769 out of 6,627,862. Do you see that?
You read a 42%, and I'm not seeing that.
Excuse me. I need to get new glasses and maybe a hearing aid. 44.35%.
Okay, I see that.
Okay. And this was an off-year election?
I don't have a very specific understanding of that term, but I think I know what you're trying to get at, and I'm happy to accept that that's what you mean by off year.
What I meant, the president didn't run in 2000.
Yeah, it's a non-presidential year election. It's certainly what Dr. Hoffman referred to as a, quote, off-year election.
Okay. I've got another exhibit I want to hand up, Your Honor.
Yes.
Are there any more stickers?
I brought them up right now.
Why don't you do this? What number is it? Give me the first one.
283.
Okay, you do that. So.
Thank you.
Dr. Chen, do you have exhibit LDTX 283?
Yes, I do.
And does that say it's an 11/06/2018 official general election results statewide from the North Carolina SBE?
Yes, I see that.
And this is a report on the 2018 race for North Carolina Supreme Court.
I see that.
And you see under the ballot cast section, they report a turnout of 52.98%.
I do see that.
And that's higher than the turnout for exhibit LDTX 282, which was the 2004 Senate race. Is that correct?
You're asking me to compare that to the 2014 U.S. Senate?
Yes.
Sure. I mean, that's certainly a higher number.
Okay, and this is a statewide election for Supreme Court?
That is my understanding.
And the winner was a lady named Anita Earls?
Yes, I see that.
And you see where she got 49.56% of the two-party vote?
Sure.
Okay. Let's go back to Exhibit U1. What's the on your uniform swing analysis, what's the closest number that you've got to 49.56?
So what exactly are you asking me to do? You're asking me to look for 49.56?
Yeah, I said you've got the column there on the left, that's your uniform swing numbers, and I'm just asking you to tell me in that column, which is the number that you think is closest to 49.56?
Okay, so you're taking that 49.56 from the Supreme Court Associate Justice Seat 1 race.
Yes,
And you're looking for the row here that corresponds most closely to it.
right.
Okay, I mean, I see what you're doing there, what you're asking for there. I'll just say at the outset, it doesn't
Well,
really make sense.
Can you
to do-
just answer the question
Okay,
first?
sure. So I guess that would be somewhere between the 49.42% and 49.92%.
And at 49.42, how many seats do you predict the Democrats would win under your analysis of the enacted House plan?
Well, I think that's where you're just starting to get into a
Well,
misinterpretation.
no, you can
but-
go into your explanation, Dr. Chen, but I just want you to tell me, at 49.42, how many seats do you predict the Democrats will win in your uniform swing
Sure, I'm going to
analysis?
answer your question, but I'm going to explain what this figure actually says when you look at that red star.
Well, you can do that on cross-examination, but I'm just asking you to tell me what, at 49.42 on this chart, how many Democratic seats do you predict?
Your Honor, I object. I think the witness should be allowed to answer the question.
I'd like for him to answer the question too, Your Honor.
We also would like an answer, but he can define his understanding of the terms that you are asking him, and if they mean something other than what you mean, then he's allowed to explain his answer. So we're going to allow an explanation. We would also like an answer.
So, Mr. Farr, you're pointing to this red star on the 49.42% row, and I'm going to tell you what that, it's 49.42% row. And I'm going to tell you what that red star tells us in terms of the number of Democratic districts. What it's telling us is that in an electoral environment where you take the 2010 to 2016 statewide election composite measure, which, by the way, does not include this Supreme Court election, because that was not one of the elections that Representative Lewis laid out. But if you take the 2010 to 2016 statewide election composite and you swing it in favor of the Democratic's vote share, you bump up the Democratic vote share by 1.5%, hence resulting in a statewide 49.42% Democratic statewide average among this 2010 to 16 statewide election composite. You get an enacted plan that creates 44 Democratic districts using that 2010 to 16 statewide election composite measure. So that's what this figure is telling us.
Okay. And what is it telling us at 49.92%? How many seats does it predict at that level?
Sure, this chart is telling us that if you take the 2010 to 16 the 2010 to 16 statewide election composite, and you apply to that statewide election composite a 2% uniform swing in the Democratic vote share, then the enacted plan under that electoral condition would have 45 districts that are Democratic leaning using that 2010 to 16 statewide election composite plus the uniform swing.
Okay, and at both of those levels, Dr. Chen, none of your simulations result in a plan that would elect a majority of Democrats.
So yeah, you can see that on those two rows, there are no simulated plans where Democrats would win 60 or more, or the Democrats would have 60 or more districts.
Okay. And is it, you understand that the Republicans, or the Democrats elected 55 House members in 2018, correct?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch everything you said.
You understand that the Democrats elected 55 House members in 2018?
I'm happy to take your word for it.
Okay.
I didn't know that.
And I believe in their complaint, hopefully I won't get my math wrong again, that the plaintiffs allege that that the Democrats received 51.2% of the two-party statewide legislative vote.
If I could just ask you to repeat that last part again.
Yeah, it's my understanding that in the amended complaint, the plaintiffs have alleged that the Democrat the House candidates received 51.2% of the two-party statewide vote in 2018.
Okay, I'll take your word for that.
Okay, what's the closest figure on your chart there to 51.2%?
Sure, I'm going to answer your question, but in answering your question, I'm going to explain what this chart actually shows, which is this chart is not along the vertical axis a measure of the aggregated state legislative election results. Instead, it's once again using the 2010 to 16 statewide election composite. Now, did I hear you right? You said 51.2?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So what we can look at is a row that's 51.42%. And I believe that would be the closest numerically.
And
so
I'm sorry, Dr. Chen.
Okay. I was just in the middle of answering your question, so that is I believe that's the 6th row from the top. And what that row shows us is that under an electoral environment where you take the 2010 to 16 statewide election composite and you apply a uniform swing of 3.5% in the Democratic to the Democratic vote share, using that statewide election composite, not using state legislative elections, then you would get an enacted plan that has, if I'm looking at this right, 46, I believe, 46 districts where the Democrats outweigh the Republicans or outnumber the Republican votes after applying that particular uniform swing. Now, as I said before, this is a statewide election composite measure. The numbers would be completely different if you were trying to construct something like this using state legislative elections. So that wouldn't be an appropriate interpretation of this figure.
Okay. And did you say the level you were at was 51.42?
I believe that's where we got to last, 51.42.
And is it fair to say, Dr. Chen, at that level, none of your simulated maps produce districts that would result in a Democratic majority?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm gonna hope that we can do this the quick way. If we can't, we won't. But Dr. Chen, if you look at exhibits 33, plaintiff's exhibits 33, 34, 35, 36, 29, is it fair to say that those are all exhibits for your Senate Set 1 that correspond to the House exhibits we just went through?
If you could just read those out to me again.
They're the final pages under tab 6. It would be plaintiff's 33, plaintiff's 34, plaintiff's 35. I've got plaintiff's 28 and plaintiff's 29.
And you're just asking me if those are descriptions of Senate Simulation Set 1?
Right, and do they correspond to the ones we just looked at for House Set 1?
Well, I don't know what you mean by correspond. They're obviously from my original report, and they're describing Senate Simulation Set 1.
But they're the same. So like your compactness exhibit 33 corresponds to the compactness chart you did for the House.
Well, they're a different set of simulations. They are analogous
Okay,
to
analogous.
those previous figures.
So like if I went through and asked all the same questions for these Senate charts that I asked you for the House charts, would you answer them the same way?
You're asking about all these questions you were asking about the uniform swing figure.
Yeah, and whether, for example, did you program your algorithm to, so that your simulated maps would use the average REOC score or Polsby-Popper score for your simulation?
Oh, okay, I thought you were just asking me about the uniform swing figure, but you're asking me about everything. I mean, we've covered a lot of ground here today.
Yeah, well, I'd like to cut out an hour of testimony if we can, so if I need to go through it, I will, but like if I asked you the same questions about Exhibit 33 that I asked you about House, or Exhibit 14, is it fair to say you pretty much give me the same answers?
You're just going to have to tell me what those questions are.
Okay, all right,
I'm just
I tried
telling-
my best, Your
Your
Honor.
Honor, if I could object. I appreciate the fact that Mr. Barr is we all appreciate that fact. If there's some way to phrase the question in a more abstract way to capture, I think I know what you're trying to get at, but obviously the specific answers would be different.
I'll try to do my best. I was just hoping I wouldn't have to go through each one of these charts, but let's just do it this way. We're looking at Figure 16, Exhibit 33. Did you instruct your algorithm to draw simulated districts that matched the average compactness scores for the 2017 enacted plans?
That's not what I did. I instructed the algorithm, or I programmed the algorithm to favor more compact districts over less compact districts.
And you looked at the average scores for the entire plan?
I did.
Exhibit 34, which is Figure 17 from your report, and it's a report on split municipalities. Did you instruct your algorithm to draw a plan that would match the number of divided municipalities in the 2017 Senate plan?
No, I programmed the algorithm to favor plans or district lines that split fewer municipalities over those that split more municipalities.
All right, and Exhibit 35, which is Figure 18, did you instruct your algorithm to draw simulated plans that would divide the same number of VTDs that were divided by the 2017 Senate plan?
No, I programmed the algorithm to favor plans that split fewer VTDs over districting lines that split more VTDs.
Okay. And I do have one other question about this, Dr. Chen. I think my memory is there's about 2,600 VTDs in North Carolina. Just from a common sense standpoint, do you think the difference between 3 divided VTDs and 5 divided VTDs is significant? Do you really think that's significant?
What I assess is statistical significance using a distribution. Now, look, we all know that Senate districts are such that a very large number of all of North Carolina's of North Carolina's VTDs are just not going to be split simply due to the sheer population size. So the proper comparison is not, say, 5 versus 2,600 or whatever. Proper comparison is 5 versus what would have happened under a map drawing process that actually tries to follow the traditional districting principles of VTDs in municipalities and compactness.
Okay. And I'm looking at Figure 14, which is Senate Simulation Set 1, and this is your chart where you're comparing how many Democratic districts under the 2017 Senate plan in your simulations. Do you see that?
I see Figure 14.
Okay. And you're predicting that the 2017 Senate plan has 18 Democratic districts.
Well, I'm just calculating. I'm not predicting anything. I'm just calculating that using the elections that Representative Lewis laid out, it's going to be 18 Democratic districts.
All right. And your simulations result, the low end, 32% of your simulations add up to or 32.1% of your simulations add up to 19 Democratic districts. Is that right?
Yes.
And so from a common sense standpoint, you really think the difference of 1 is significant?
You're asking about the difference between 18 versus 19?
Yeah, you really think that's significant, one district?
It's not just one district. Look at the next bar in the middle of this histogram. 50.8, a little over half of the simulated plans actually create 20 Democratic districts compared to the Senate plan, the enacted Senate plan's 18. More to the point, what we see that's statistically significant is when we go county grouping by county grouping and see all of the partisan outlier districts that I testified about in the Senate plan yesterday.
Okay, but 32.1%, that's over 300 of your simulated plans, have 19 Democratic districts.
That's what the simulation results here show. The point here is that there's much more about this plan that's a partisan outlier than just looking at the statewide numbers here.
Okay.
This is just one piece of it.
Okay, so where's it illegal, Dr. Chen? Is it illegal at 19 or 20 or 21? Where's the court supposed to draw the line?
I'm obviously not.
Objection, Your Honor.
Do you have an opinion on where the line should be drawn?
I'm obviously.
Objection, Your Honor. Sustained.
Let's look at Exhibit 29. This is your uniform swing analysis for your Senate simulation set 1. And Dr. Chen, I forgot to ask you this question. Have you ever done a study of North Carolina elections to see if there's ever been an election where there was a uniform swing in all districts?
I've not done a uniform swing analysis specifically of North Carolina elections. I've done uniform swing analyses of generally nationwide elections. Using statewide elections within those various states. So that's what I've done. I've done it across all states, but not necessarily specifically to, say, the 2010 to 16 statewide election composite like I've done here in this report.
Okay, that wasn't the question I asked. Have you ever gone back and investigated whether North Carolina's ever had an election where there was a uniform swing of any amount between an election in year 1 versus year 2?
Okay, so you're asking me if I've ever studied whether the change in partisanship from one election to another was a particular percentage point? Is that what you're asking me in North Carolina?
Yes.
Right. Okay, I think that makes sense. And I mean, the answer is no, that's just not, I haven't done that because that's just not the way the uniform swing analysis works. The point isn't to see, for example, how much the election, the statewide vote share changed from 2016 to 2018 or 2018 to 2020 or whatever successive elections. The point is to apply the uniform swing to study a wide range of alternative electoral environments.
Okay, and on Exhibit 29, which is your uniform swing analysis for Senate Set 1, would you confirm that at your uniform swing level of 50.82%, none of your simulated plans produce a majority of Democratic seats?
Did you say 50.82?
I think it's 50.92 is what I meant to say.
Okay, and you can see on that row that the simulations are all, the simulated plans range from 20 to 24, so that's of course under 25.
Okay, and at the 51.42 level, you've got 72 simulated plans that result in a tie between the Democrats and the Republicans, but over 900 of your simulations still do not produce either a tie or a majority of Democratic seats.
You're asking about 51.42?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I see that. I see that it's 72 that are right at 25.
And then at the top of that chart, at the 53.92%, you would predict that the enacted Senate plan at that level would have a majority of Democratic seats.
With a uniform swing of plus 6% at 53.92% statewide Democratic vote share, that is the first time that the enacted plan finally gets to 26. So that is correct.
Okay. One final question on this set of exhibits I forgot to ask. Could you turn back to Plaintiff's Exhibit 10, which is the first chart, or it's not the first one. It's the uniform swing analysis you do for the House. Are you there, Dr. Chen?
I am.
I just wanted to know, did you ever figure out under your analysis at what level your simulated plans would result in a majority of the seats being Democrat in the House? Or did you just stop at 53.92?
In this chart, I just applied everything from minus 6% to plus 6% uniform swing.
Okay. Your Honor, did I understand we were supposed to stop at 3:30?
I have about 5 minutes that we could go further, trying to maximize the time we have.
I think it'd probably be better if we stopped, Your Honor, because the next line of questions are completely different.
Very good. We'll be in recess until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning.